Hello everyone, and welcome to the Commander's Forge. I am your host, Andy Bentley, and the Commander's Forge is an area for me to talk about magic, Commander, and the game in ways that I enjoy. And it's not always good news. That said, let's get into our stats for April. Now, in the month of April, I played 16 games. And I won once. That brings us to a win rate of 6.25% for the month of April. Looking through all of the games that I played, the person I played the most was Andy Fleury, which isn't really a surprise at this point, with a total of 12 games. The next closest to that would be Parker S. with a total of 7 games, followed in third place by Coyle with 5 games. And looking through the decks that I played, I didn't have one that I played the most, but I did have 4 decks that I ended up playing twice. They were Kengi the Sky Warden, Adeliz the Cinderwind, Yumori the Collector, and then a partner deck with Ichtekik Salvage Splicer and Bruce Tarl Boorish Herder, which used to be Ichtekik and Ishai Ojitai Dragon Speaker, but I shifted into red-white from white-blue because of the Strixhaven Commander deck releasing with Alibu, and I really wanted to run that card in that deck. That's kind of it for my stats for last month. I didn't get around to playing a ton of games, and honestly, most of those games were in like the last 3 days of the month. But it kind of hit hard when it felt like the decks that I've built just weren't doing what they were supposed to do. And I had to kind of step away for a little bit because that voice in the back of my head was starting to get to me. I took a couple of days to kind of recollect my thoughts. I completely reworked a deck or two because that's where I go when my mind isn't working. And it's not necessarily that I realized there was nothing I could do about it. It's more of I could do something about it, but how far into making a deck that is specifically made to be unbeatable do I want to go? Because that's not the kind of game I want to play. Yes, it's very difficult when you can't seem to pull your synergies together. But that's not the kind of game I'm looking to play. I like, even if I lose, to be able to laugh and say that was a good game. I like being able to sit after a game, even when everyone's like, oh yeah, we gotta go, and we're all just sitting there talking because we've created a community that's really good for everything. So I guess I'm just saying I don't like to bring negativity into that. So I guess it's just me saying it's okay to not be okay and to take a break. Lord knows we all need them at one point or another. And that's all I got for this part of the podcast. I will be right back with the second portion. Sorry, I lost track there. I'll be right back.
Hey,
Did you know that for as little as $1 a month, you can help support this podcast? All you have to do is go to patreon.com/commandersforge, and that is CMDR_forge. That's it. That's all I got to say about it. If you want to help support the podcast, you can go there. Okay, getting into the meat of the rest of the episode. I mentioned earlier how I took Adelies and I was reworking it. Now, in truth, I went slightly backwards into a version of the deck that I played almost 2 years ago. And it was built around Grape Shot. Now, my idea to go back to this style of deck was because of the Mystical Archive, and I pulled a Grape Shot. Or I bought it. I forget which. Either way, I wanted to run it. So, I sat down and I was like, if we're going to go Glass Cannon, we're going to go Glass Cannon. The first edition, because of it, Viren, Voice of Duality. Viren is a 2/2 Efreet Wizard. It was from the Prismari Commander decks. It costs 1, a blue and a red. It has Magecraft, and whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, Viren, Voice of Duality gets +1/+1 till end of turn. But more importantly, if you casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So if you have Viren and Adelies out and cast an instant, Viren says, hey, I'm going to give myself +2/+2, making it a 4/4. Adelies triggers and says, I'm going to give everybody +1/+1. But then Adelies triggers again, giving everybody +1/+1. Which means, with these two out, if you cast one instant, Adelies becomes a 4/4, and Viren becomes a 6/6. But that, whenever you're casting or copying a spell is a big part of it, because a lot of Adelies is already trying to copy spells. And that brings in our 3rd edition, Reiterate. Reiterate is an instant for 1 red with buyback of 3 generic mana, but you can copy target instant or sorcery spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Now, my idea to run this was because I had seen somebody else go infinite with red mana and the next card that I'm going to talk about, which is Mana Geyser. Mana Geyser is a sorcery for 3 red that says add red for each tapped land your opponents control. Now, if you Mana Geyser for 5 mana, and you make 7 mana, you can then reiterate paying 6, which will copy Mana Geyser, making 7. And as long as you net 7, your mana will go infinite. Or say we have Viren out, we just need to do it for 6 and then make Viren nice and big, nice and swole. Now, this style deck tends to need to lean into mana production. And so that's where our Seething Song, Desperate Ritual, and Pyretic Ritual all come in. Starting with Seething Song, which is a instant for 2 and a red. It says add 5 red mana. Desperate Ritual is an instant for 1 and a red that adds 3 red mana to your mana pool. You can also splice it onto an arcane for 1 and a red. That's, I don't think that's possible in this deck. And then our third one, Pyretic Ritual, which is an instant for 1 and a red that adds 3 red to our mana pool. Now, we want our investments to pay dividends, right? So we added things like Jessica's Will, which is a sorcerer for 2 and a red, and if you control your commander, you can choose both, but you add red for each card in target opponent's hand, and you exile the top 3 cards of your library, and you can play them this turn. Or you can dump mana into Dig for Time without having to exile cards out of your graveyard. It's an instant for 6 blue. It has Delve, so you can pay for the generic mana cost by exiling cards from your graveyard. But you look at the top 7 cards of your library, you put 2 of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. There's a funny thing that I noticed when I added Raw Storm Conduit. Legendary Planeswalker Raw comes in with 4 loyalty, and it costs 2, a blue and a red. But its static ability is whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, Raw Storm's Conduit deals 1 damage to target opponent or Planeswalker. I had forgotten that triggers on copying spells. So with our Rarity and Mana Geyser combo, we could just ping the board to death. But it does have a +2, which is Scry 1, and a -2 that says when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell, and you may choose new copies or new targets for the copy. It's again, it's kind of doing 2 of the things that Adelies wants to be doing at this point. The next card I added has slowly gone up in my not quite sure the word for it, estimation? That's Experimental Frenzy. It's an enchantment for 3 and a red that says you may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may play the top card of your library, and you can't play cards from your hands. And then you can pay 3 and a red to destroy Experimental Frenzy. I played a game with this yesterday, and I may have been taken out first because I had Experimental Frenzied into, God, I don't know, something like 30 damage. It was interesting first outing of the new deck. Now we get into the part that I'm not the biggest fan of, but in a deck this style is kind of necessary, and that's protecting what you're trying to do. So first up we have Narset's Reversal, which is an instant for blue, and you copy target instant or sorcery spell, then return it to its owner's hand. You may choose new targets for the copy. So you can copy what you're trying to do and they're countering, putting the original back into your hand, or if they're trying to go off and do something, you can do it before them. Let's just say I was blown out recently by an Narset's Reversal when I cast a Kamal's Druidic Vow for 32. Still salty about that. But it did impress that things needed in decks cannot be avoided. Next up, we slotted our 1 copy of Fierce Guardianship into this deck because honestly it was sitting in a deck that wasn't getting played. So that's an instant for Tuna Blue, and it says as long as you control a commander, you may cast the spell without paying its mana cost, and it just counters a non-creature spell. Then we added Tybalt's Trickery. One red for an instant that counters a spell. You choose 1, 2, or 3 at random. Its controller mills that many cards, then exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card with a different name from that spell. They cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then they put the exile cards on the bottom of their library in any order. This is a long way of saying if they try to stop what we're trying to do, we take the chance on giving them something else. Because the chances of it, again, being something that's going to shut us down, less likely. And the last card that got added was a Pact of Negation. It's a 0 mana for an instant that says counter target spell, and at the beginning of your next upkeep, pay 3 blue. If you don't, you lose the game. Now, again, 9 times out of 10, we're going to cast this to protect our game-winning combo, and occasionally we'll have to use it to shut down somebody else's game-winning combo, like I did the other day. But that's it. That's what I have been doing to help clear my mind. And Adeliz is this weird amalgamation of 3 different deck styles. It is still aggro, which is my preferred deck style, and it's still tempo because it messes with everybody else to try and help me get through. And then there's a control element. But it's actually just a lot of fun to play. But yeah, that's what I got for this week. If you enjoyed it and you're watching this on the YouTubes, hit the like button. Consider subscribing, and if you do, hit the bell for notifications. And I will see you next time. That brings us to the end of the podcast. I would like to thank Nate and Erica Jacobs for designing my logo, and Cody Mulpey and Ian Foss for allowing me to use a sample of music from their band The Crypt. The podcast can be found on YouTube by searching Commander's Forge. The podcast is Commander's Forge, that is CMDR_Forge on Twitter. I can be found on Twitter at Bentzmister, that is BENTZMR. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, here's to fun games and sick plays.